You are listening to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, a podcast for Freemasons and the public, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular.
Welcome back to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast. It's your host, Brother Jack Aquilino, for episode 5, which we've entitled The Second Degree. Today I'm very lucky to be joined with a new guest host. Well, it shouldn't be really a guest, more of a brother host. Brother Steve Austin. Hi Steve, how are you?
G'day Jack, how are you going today?
Yeah, good. Thank you for coming on. It's been wanting to get you on for ages, and especially considering, you're the Assistant District Education Officer?
Yes, recently appointed. Bit of an honour. I got presented with my badge a week or so ago at my one of my 2 craft lodges.
Yeah, which craft lodge was that?
Fairfield.
Fairfield, okay.
Fairfield Lodge, which meets at Ove Elder on the second Wednesday.
Yep.
I've recently resigned from Ivanhoe Grammarians just because something had to give.
Yep.
It was in 3 craft lodges.
Yep.
The other being a Daylight Lodge, actually.
Okay.
Which is the Samaritan Daylight, which was originally an evening lodge. Went on the 5th week of the other month, each other month, because I was basically for... back in the day, there was a lot of travelling salesmen and
Yep.
that kind of thing, and they had a very wide membership from across the state and interstate. People would come to this lodge meeting. As years have gone by, the members are all a bit older and they moved to a daylight lodge, which, for those that don't know about daylight lodges, they generally tile or start. That's when they get together. It's when the meeting begins, tile, at 10 a.m. And the meeting generally goes for an hour and a half or 2, and you'll have your South or festive board, a dinner as a lunch at about midday. Wrap up about 2-ish, thereabouts.
And the dress code's obviously, instead of wearing a dinner suit, you wear a lounge suit.
That's correct, yes. Yep. It's just a little bit more comfortable. No gloves, dinner suit, and just your apron, and no full Grand Lodge regalia, generally. An installation team would just wear lounge suits as well. Yeah. Obviously, they're a bit sharper when they have an installation, but rare to see, obviously, first degrees and degree work done at daylight lodges. Luckily enough, this particular lodge, Samaritan, had one only a couple of years ago. A Master Mason came through. He was actually a cleaner in the building.
Okay.
And he got that curious, and they recruited him.
They brought him in?
Yeah, so he's loved it. So a few of the older brethren there were dusting off the ritual book, which is a great day. I went to 2 of his degrees. I wasn't a member at that point. I was visiting because I was been studying at university, and I had Thursdays free. And the current master, or the master that just went out, he had a joking, once you visit 3 times, you have to join. Yeah. So I took him literally.
And joined.
But also, the main reason I joined at Samaritan is my mother lodge, which was Plenty Valley, unfortunately had to hand in its warrant a couple of years ago, September 27th, I think it was, 2014.
Yeah, just so our listeners know, when a lodge hands in its warrant, the warrant is the document given by Grand Lodge to constitute the lodge. And when the warrant is handed in, it's actually when the lodge decides to close and finish its operations. And there's actually a really sad ceremony. The Grand Lodge comes in, they close the lodge for the last time, and the master hands over the warrant back to Grand Lodge. I've been to one of them, and that was for Lodge Aquila. It must have been tough seeing your mother lodge close.
Yeah, it was a real... still brings a tear to my eye to this day, actually. It's experience that no brother should have to go through, I don't think, personally. But with the state of Freemasonry, and so many things in the world, I think it's a natural progression that we'll eventually have less lodges to become stronger.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard stories of lodges closing, handing in their warrants, and then later down the track, them being restarted. So it isn't always the end, is it?
No, not always. Not always. This was Plenty Valley was a pretty strong lodge for a while. It met on a 4th Saturday, which you find a lot of younger brethren with young families, and that's weekend is family time. The lodge did make a move to go to a Thursday, unfortunately due to a few PGMs, GPMs I should say, which acronym I'll extend on a bit later perhaps. They didn't want to move from a Saturday because it was traditionally the night they met, and they just wouldn't budge. So obviously it's got to be consensus of majority that want to move the night. personally feel that would have probably kept it going. We lost 6 brethren, or the lodge lost 6 brethren before I joined, but my father was a consecrating member of this lodge. They were consecrated, which consecration is when a lodge is formed, of the Kinglake and Epping lodges, were joined together or amalgamated and formed Plenty Valley, because that's the region of Melbourne that it's in. And my father was out of Freemasonry for 30-something years, and he went to this consecration ceremony, and it sparked his interest again.
Yep.
And is an active member until he passed away.
Yeah. Is that the reason you joined Freemasonry, because your dad was a member?
That's the main catalyst, I suppose you could say. My grandfather was a Freemason. My brother joined, and consequently his father-in-law joined. And my sister's father-in-law is also a member.
Yep.
They're all members of that particular lodge. Surprisingly, my brother joined and became a fellow craft, which is obviously what we'll be talking about today, the second degree, and moved to Darwin, and he was in the army at that point and was put on deployment. So there was a very large gap, I think a couple of years, between his second and third degrees. And in that preceding time, his father-in-law joined and went through the 3 degrees and became a Master Mason before my brother did. My brother was active for 11 years. He's now in transition. Same deal. Young family. Becomes
difficult.
Work. Yeah. So, for those that don't know, you leave Freemason. You once a Freemason, always a Freemason. But like anything, you have to be financial. What they call a financial member. So if you move lodge or move area, or sometimes you'll find members will go into what we call transition, and there is actually a lodge transition that meets once a year. It's lodge number 0 here in Victoria. They'll often have half a dozen guys, and sometimes they'll have up to 50 guys who'll go to lodge once a year just to find out what's happening. They'll still get the Engage newsletter and stay in contact with Freemasonry.
Yeah.
It generally is a period of about 12 to 24 months that membership still stays sort of semi-active, and you can reactivate it at another lodge.
Yeah.
Other than that, you get what we call a leaving certificate, or a clearance certificate. Sorry, when lodge. So when my lodge folded, we had to go through that whole process. Each member got a clearance certificate, and I had to select a new home, so to speak. I mean, your mother lodge will always be your first lodge.
Yeah.
So I shortlisted 3 or 4 lodges, and my only stipulation, I wanted to meet at a lodge that met at the same temple or Masonic Centre, which is Ivalda, and because it's a special place to me.
It's a very special temple.
It is. It's a beautiful, beautiful temple, hidden away. When you point it out to people, they say, "Oh, geez, I've seen that somewhere." I say, "Well, it's right next to the train lines. You probably go past it every day to work, and you wouldn't even know it's there."
Yeah.
So I shortlisted half a dozen with my father. We talked about it. As I said, he passed away about 2.5 years ago. So I joined 2, and in the aim to decide within 12 to 24 months to make one of those one. So hence I recently resigned from Arithmetic purely because the Thursday night with my... I'm a member of a career club, and Thursdays is a busy night during the summer.
But that's part of the whole lesson of the degrees, in the sense that it's about finding that balance, and the 24-inch gauge in the first degree about how to use your time. And if you have to, the rule in Freemasonry is family and friends come first, and your work, and that also must include your other interests.
Yeah, of course.
So, I'm sure Ivanhoe Grammarians, which is a fantastic lodge.
And I'll continue to visit there 6 or 7 times a year, probably.
So even though you're not a member, you're still going to be there.
Yeah, of course. And I've made some great friends there. You asked me how I joined Freemasonry, Jack. I sort of got off topic there a little bit.
Go ahead. Yep. How did you join?
Well, I was all keen and wanted to join when I was in my early 20s, and my father was keen to have me. But you go through a process of joining, and if someone doesn't think you're ready or of a manner that's befitting to become a Freemason, they can stop that process. And my brother told me, my own brother, said, if you try and join now...
Brother.
My brother.
Yeah.
He said, you're not ready. And as annoyed and I was at the time, he was correct. And after I went through the process, it was all answered to me why you have to go through this process and to be of a certain level of a gentleman and asset to society.
Exactly right. You have to be. When we say ready, you have to be ready in the sense you have to actually want it, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we think we want things in life, but people know us better than ourselves, and you have to have that drive, and that you have to be at that state of mind to be in a good place.
Yeah.
Not saying you can't join if you've got issues in your life. Everyone's got issues, but you have to be in a position where you are joining for the right reasons. And I guess it was good that you had
That's
your brother
correct.
there.
Yeah, look, we're alike and disalike in many ways, but he was correct. And our grandfather used to joke that he was never wrong, he was only mistaken. And he thought he was wrong once, but he was only mistaken. And that was Malcolm. My brother's James Malcolm, I'm Stephen Eric. And
Yeah.
we've both got bits of our grandfather in us.
Yeah.
And that was, my brother was right. And he's, as I said, army guy, and his job will limits what I can say about him. So I'll just leave it at that. That he's very upright, and he doesn't. There's no messing around.
He's at that state. Yep.
Yep. So he's been a great guide to me, and my father was probably the main reason. As I said, he came into Plenty Valley after 30 years out of the craft, thereabouts. He joined as a Lewis, which was to join as a Freemason. You have to be 21, unless your father was a Freemason or a very close relative. I think it was your father, and you could join at 18. So he joined at 18, and at Lodge Literature, which met at Gibb Street in Collingwood, which is still an active Masonic centre.
Yeah.
And he went, loved it, and then he got married at 21, and things went away. And there's also a rule in Freemasonry: if you don't get along or don't see eye with another brother, then just make sure there's no disharmony in the lodge.
So it's better that you leave and work out your differences outside of lodge than, you know. Yeah.
And unfortunately, he couldn't work out the differences with this particular brother, who was also a relative of his, which we won't go into. But so he left, and life took over. But he was always, and now I'm in Freemasonry, the elements that he's taught me, values of life, are very all Masonic based. So he's always had that in his life, even though he wasn't active.
Yeah, I mean,
an active Freemason.
You don't have to be an active Freemason to live the applied Freemasonry. That's what we're talking about, applying the stuff in lodge. That's what I mean, and that's really interesting. That's a whole topic for another time.
Yeah.
But thank you. That was really good. It's good that the listeners have an idea of who you are and where you come. It's really interesting. And one thing we're trying to convey is that every different host we have comes from a different background and have approached the craft really differently. I had no family who were members, and I sort of took that leap of faith. And hopefully, you have my younger brother joining, and maybe kids one day if I'm lucky enough, and all these other things. Hopefully, I'll be in a position.
I must admit, it was probably one of the proudest moments, and I've got a photo in my case every time, and it's me and my brother and father all in our lodge gear, and my father obligated me in all my 3 degrees, and it's something that will always be with you, and not everyone gets that opportunity. So, if you're lucky enough to have family go through it, and my brother was the deacon through all my degrees, so something we'll always have.
Yeah, but that's the thing. And your brother was the deacon for all your degrees. That's really special. I mean, my younger brother, I'll be the deacon for his ceremony.
Yeah.
So hopefully I had the same experience that you had with your brother. But thanks for giving us that background.
Right. Make sure you don't pitch him on the bum like my brother was.
Took it to the next level. Brotherly love.
Yeah.
Well, basically, what we're going to do today, Steve, is we're going to have a discussion about the second degree. We're going to get worshipful brother James Tolk, your mentor and friend.
He's a district education officer, and he's
your boss.
He's my boss, and he's the one who requested that I get appointed. I've been his map assistant for 4 years, which is one of the other things I do in Freemasonry. I mean, I've got my craft lodges. I'm also a Master Mason, which is one of the degrees. Jim will dwell on that a bit more, to extend on that a bit more today. And I'm also a secretary of a Lodge of Instruction, which is like a practice lodge that anybody from any lodge can come and practice that. And, Jack, I've taken over the Northern District, as you mentioned. We've got the Maroondah District starting up, so I'm going to help you out here in the Northern District, take a bit of pressure off you. And,
I forgot about that. Oh, you are the president of the Blue Lounge in the Northern District. Thank you. Congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you.
You've done a lot of great work, and I know that if you have any questions for Steve, in the sense that you're in the Northern District, you're a young Mason, and you want a bit of guidance, and you want to become part of, whether it's the district education stuff they do or the Blue Lounge, these things are starting to overlap now because they're all focused on the same strategic vision. You can email Steve at blue.fmvic.com.
Yes.
And he'll answer your questions and get in touch with you. So,
no, not a problem at all. And you'll really enjoy this interview with Jim today. He's very passionate. I've seen the Masonic Advancement Program in other districts, and what Jim's done is revolutionising it, and I'll let him talk about that today.
Beautiful. Well, without further ado, we'll get together with our interview with Worshipful Brother James Tolk. Welcome back to Worshipful Brother James Tolk, the District Education Officer. Thank you for coming back in.
Thank you for having me back. I didn't think you'd have me back after last week.
No,
I'm so pleased to have you.
I think everyone really enjoyed the show, so it's good to have you in.
I trust you've had a good week, have you?
I did. Kept busy.
Beautiful.
And I think this week we're going to be talking about the second degree.
The second degree.
So you've got some real pearlers for us, I hope.
We do. There's great stuff in the second degree.
Yeah, it's probably, honestly, I think the third degree is fantastic, but the second degree was really impressionable because I actually was there and wasn't blindfolded. I actually understood what was happening and I took something away from it. But anyway, let's get straight into it.
Okay.
So let's talk about the link between the second degree and the first degree, aside from the fact that it happens to be the second degree. What's the link between the two degrees?
We do know that ancient manuscripts talk about there being 2 degrees in Freemasonry. We do know that. And when you look at those 2 degrees, you can see that they do reflect each other. They mirror each other in many ways. That's the first thing that I got when I first walked in. When you go and do your second degree, for those who haven't done it, you've been around Freemasonry now for several months, and you've seen ceremonial, you've seen things, you're enlightened. Okay, you are now a little bit enlightened. You're now aware, and you're now conscious of what the teaching a little bit more. So you're very much more receptive in this ceremony.
You think you're comfortable? Yes, yeah.
You start taking it in. You're not just thinking, "Wow." The wow factor's gone now. It's the fact that okay, yeah, right, yeah, okay. You're taking this in now, right? So you actually made a progression.
Yeah.
So, and that's reflected. And the first thing that I felt in my second degree was the fact that, I'm kneeling on one knee, now I'm kneeling on the other knee. Okay, and it's yin and it's yang. It's reflecting each other. So these 2 degrees go side by side. 1 degree talks about your origin or your beginning, the initiating or starting something, and that degree teaches you everything you need to know to be a Freemason. This is the first degree. We teach you virtues, faith, hope and charity, prudence, fortitude, temperance, justice, all these cardinal virtues. All these virtues are taught to you right from the word go. It's okay, now we've got that on board with us, and now we are making a progress.
Yeah, so, just in terms of some stuff I've got written here in terms of themes, so like you said, the first degree sets you up for Freemasonry. It says, this is how you become a good Freemason.
Yep.
Whereas the second degree, we're looking at things like education, self-improvement, learning.
Yep.
So this is really the education degree, isn't it?
It really represents a big part of your life, the part where you meet the woman that you're going with, the partner that you're going to share your life with. You start down a career that will probably take you through most of your life, where you will gain a lot of knowledge, wealth, interest, whatever. I don't know, but it's that part of your life where you're physically and mentally alert and active, and it takes you down that road.
So the second degree for most people, if we were to try to position it in our own lives, most of us would be living this aspect
Absolutely.
of our life.
We're living the second degree now.
Yep.
All of us. We're living the second degree now in our homes, in our lives.
So it's an active degree in the sense that when we're going through it, it's not too unfamiliar because we're actually doing these things day to day, which is fantastic. And one thing I loved about it was the focus on self-improvement. But one thing I did notice, there's a lot of talk about it, is the liberal arts and sciences, all the hidden mysteries of nature and science. What does that mean? What are we talking about there?
They are talked about, they're alluded to. The 7 liberal arts and sciences are mentioned, but they're not really explained too much. But when you start reading about them, you realise the fact that these 7 liberal arts and sciences, and I'll explain to you what they are, they're divided into 2 groups. One's called the Trivium, and the other group is called the Quadrivium. Now, this is Latin. Trivium means 3 roads. like you go to Rome and to Italy, it's the via this or the via that.
Okay.
Trivium is the 3 roads and the quadrivium is 4 roads. The 3 roads, of course, are grammar, logic, and rhetoric. The quadrivium, of course, is arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy.
Okay.
They're your 7 liberal arts and sciences. For the sake of those who maybe are not aware of what they all mean, is, okay, grammar teaches you to speak, put words together, and to form a sentence that will make sense. Grammar, speaking and conveying an idea or thought to another person, audio.
Yeah, yeah.
That's grammar. Okay, rhetoric is using those words to maybe persuade somebody to do something, or to convey an idea or thought, or to speak copiously and fluently on a particular subject. Logic, of course, is that all this makes sense, and that it's a basis of knowledge that makes sense to you. That it's logical. It's worth doing. It makes sense. It's logic. Logic tells you that this is correct.
Yeah.
Logic. So you got grammar, rhetoric, and logic. And then you got arithmetic. Now, when you get into the quadrivium, you're starting to work with geometry and numbers.
Yes.
This is a different thing. So arithmetic, of course, is the geometry of numbers. And as Pythagoras said, all is number. And this, to me, is an important part of my map too.
Yeah.
Okay, then we go into geometry itself. Geometry itself is like a branch of mathematics that works with the properties and relations of points and lines and surfaces, solids, all these sorts of things. Music, of course, is the geometry of sound. The
Yes.
value of every note is double the value of every note below it. And, of course, astronomy, study of the heavens. Now, when we study the heavens, it's ancient men, it was important to study the heavens. They could work out their calendars from that, the tides, when to sow their crops. But also, another art form called astrology sort of grew out of this, where they thought that when the stars were in a certain point, when something happened, when those stars came back to that certain point again, that the same thing could happen again.
Yeah,
And this
yeah,
is where you
yeah.
get horoscopes. So,
Yeah.
okay, so all this ancient knowledge was taught in the monasteries and right back through the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
And I've had shows where they've talked about what was taught in monasteries and teaching and ancient mysteries, and these 7 liberal arts and sciences were taught.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a basis of what they taught.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean,
Yep.
even myself, I'm a university student, and one of my second degrees is an arts degree. And arithmetic, grammar, logic,
Yep.
these things are inherent in that
Inherited.
stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely.
And geometry is such an important part of Freemasonry.
Yeah.
You know, it really is. The whole concept of angles and squares and numbers and the schools of Pythagoras have
Yep,
been
yep.
hugely influential in what we
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
So that's really, so we're encouraged, so just to clarify, we're encouraged when we do our second degree to learn these things or to take an interest in these things?
To go out and find this.
Okay.
And this is what I challenge you to do, is to go out and look for it. You are now expected to extend your researches into the hidden mysteries of nature and science. They're challenging you to go out and find this.
Yes.
Right? It's your task. You've got to go out and find this.
So my job's, it's like homework. I've got to go out and
So your
find
job
it.
is to come to my map too, and I'll tell you what it is. Simply because I want it to be accessible.
Yeah.
So I went out and found out what this was. And I used the quadrivium as a guide, particularly arithmetic and geometry as the guide.
Yeah.
And what I come up with just blew my head off.
Yeah, that's
and,
amazing.
So I bring that, we'll talk about that later perhaps. And
Yeah.
I bring that to the map too. Because when they gave me a book, I'm just, once again, bad radio, but they gave me a little book, which is the Journey Through the Second Degree. Here it is. This is what they give me, and it's not much. It really isn't much.
Just so the listeners can understand, we've got a thin little book here.
Yeah.
Probably about 10 pages.
Yeah.
So there's a bit more to it than that.
And then they gave me a DVD, and that really explained the whole ceremony. And that was good. I use that DVD because it's visual.
Yeah.
And it shows a person being led through the degree, and it shows the nuts and bolts of what we teach. But I thought, no, there's got to be more to this. There's got to be more in this degree than that. This hidden mystery of nature and science. And that's when I came across the Fibonacci sequence.
Which is very interesting, and we will defer that to a bit for a moment, because
please.
I want to quickly talk about this concept of the hidden mysteries of nature and science. 2 episodes ago, we had an episode dedicated to why I believe Freemasonry is not religion,
Yep.
and what separates the two. And we're looking at, in that episode, we're talking about spirituality versus religion, and dogma versus a lack of dogma, whatever the opposite to those. I think this concept of the hidden mysteries of nature and science really emphasises that, because it's about discovering life.
Discovering what's around you.
What's
what
around
makes your universe what it is.
Exactly right.
What makes you what you are. What part you play in your universe.
I mean, we live in an age of huge scientific discovery. We've just sent a satellite to Jupiter. We've got a rover on Mars. We've got a comet that's got something on it.
But just look at the medical advances we're making at the moment. It's just phenomenal.
It's incredible, isn't it?
So, it's just people go out and they research. We're telling you to research.
Yes.
Don't just sit back and do nothing. Research it. Go get a Kindle app on your phone and start downloading books and read about things, learn about things.
I mean, this is exactly what I was... Because we're talking about how Freemasonry was radical when it first started, in the sense that it adopted the principles of Pythagoras and Plato and these old concepts during the period of Enlightenment.
Yep.
And something I want to ask you about is, during the Dark Ages, some institutions that were based on religion said, do not think. You cannot question. Whereas this is inviting you to do exactly that.
A control of thought. In the Dark Ages, there was a real control of thought that we want you to think what we want you to think.
Yeah.
We'll control your thought. And unfortunately, there are still elements in society today that it's what's called the narrative. And the narrative can change. No matter what group you belong to, there is this like a narrative. You must stick to the narrative.
Yeah.
When someone says you must stick to the narrative, that means that, you can't think of yourself but follow that line. Even though the narrative might not make sense, we'll make it make sense.
Yeah.
And that to me makes no sense.
Exactly right. Sounds like taking the easy way out to me.
In the Dark Ages, you had to follow the narrative. If you didn't follow the narrative, you were a heretic.
Yeah.
And you paid a very high price for that.
Whereas Freemasonry does the opposite. It asks you to go out there and
Go
investigate.
out there, investigate, expand your mind. You've got a guy in your lodge room that is a Muslim, and you don't understand it. Go out and find out what he believes in.
Yeah.
Learn about it. That way you can understand him.
I think that's, and just for our listeners, I think that's an amazing thing about Freemasonry.
Yep.
I mean, not many organisations are that free. They don't give that much of a leash. This organisation says, go off, learn. And let's jump to my favourite part of every degree, the working tools. But
Absolutely.
I know there's a lot that feeds into this. I think that the second degree working tool charge is my favourite degree in the book.
It's stunning, yeah.
It's beautiful. And I hope that listeners will experience it one day. What I want to talk about is the themes. We won't ruin the surprise, but what I want to talk about is things such as natural equality and mutual dependence, that concept, the concepts of the equality, and there's this beautiful part about, the idea that we're all born into this world equal and we leave the world equal.
Yeah.
And it isn't necessarily an equality in the sense of a forced equality, but just an actual recognition that we have an equality as a species, as entities on this earth.
Well, I brushed on this last week when I was here. When you asked me about, we talked about a poor candidate, and I said that, in a higher degree, the fact that once you accumulate all this wealth, but you can't take it with you.
Yeah.
So once you leave this earth, we all live on this. Death leaves us all in the same state.
Yeah.
There are so many ideas that are pushed past you in this charge, and it's amazing. It's a long charge, but it's stunning. And natural equality, of course, it teaches that we're all equal. We are all equal, and I think it's more so now than what it was years ago.
Yeah.
Years ago, there was even though we talked about it, and I had that charge revealed to me back in 1981, and I never felt that it was equal because when you're a master mason, there were so many things you could not do.
Yeah.
And you couldn't, and we're actually changing that now. You couldn't vote in Grand Lodge. You couldn't. They had past masters meetings, and you couldn't do charges, and it was like George Orwell's book Animal Farm. Yeah. All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And I felt that, and I was a little that gnawed at me a bit. But I think currently the Grand Master we've got at the moment, he's blowing that all away.
Yeah, I think we're moving that direction, aren't we?
Blowing that all away. The fact that we are all equal, and we've got brothers that join Freemasonry, and he is no more important than I am.
Exactly.
I'm no important than he is. We're together.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay, I hold grand rank, but that doesn't mean I'm more important than you. That's just an acknowledgement. It's nothing more than an acknowledgement.
We're all brothers, aren't we?
We're all brothers. Yeah, we're all the same. And this is why when I particularly want Master Masons helping me in the map program, because I don't want the whole thing stuffed full of past masters who've been there for, because we're all equal. You know, people that are Master Masons know probably more than the guys who have been through. Just because you've been through a master role doesn't mean you're any better.
Yeah, yeah.
So now we are more equal. So it is important that we are all equal. We are all brothers and mutually dependent on each other. And this is what I talked about at Deacons when they lead you around lodge last week. We spoke about that. You know, mutual dependence. We all depend on each other. I might depend on you, but one day you may depend on me. So we're all like a network.
So this re-emphasises those principles in the first degree.
Yeah.
And I guess just looking at the working tools for this degree, you've got the square, the level, and the plumb rule. Now,
absolutely.
We looked at the square last week.
Yep.
You know, in terms of regular conduct and square conduct, all that sort of stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the level, and then the plumb rule. I think the level is the most important one here. It's operatively, the level is used to check that things are straight and level and on a good enough workable plane. Yep. Symbolically, what are we talking about?
What we're talking about with the level. Okay, the level, for those who don't understand what it is nothing more than an ancient form of a spirit level. When you place a spirit level on a floor, and you see builders do this all the time. And you have this little bubble in the middle of a tube of liquid.
And you can't buy them, I'm told.
No?
You can't buy the bubbles, I'm told.
Probably not, no. I've actually got a little spirit level that I bring out in my map with a plumb bob to show to equate what these tools do, because I think it's when you see the real form of it, you understand it better. Okay, a level, of course, is to measure horizontals. Okay, to make sure it's level. I remember my father, when he would set up a caravan, he'd have a bowl of water in the middle of the van, and he would sort of get it nice and straight so that the fridge would work and the liquid would actually set. That's the same thing. So we're measuring a horizontal, and that's important. And that horizontal, when you look at that symbolically, it talks about equality.
Yeah.
Equality. We're all level. We all meet on the level.
Yeah.
And that means we're all equal to each other.
Yeah, black or white, Muslim or Christian.
We're all equal. We're all brothers.
We're all brothers.
Our natural equality is reflected by the level.
Yeah.
And that is important for us. So that's we're all partakers in the same nature and sharers in the same. We all share the same things.
Yes.
You know, that's important.
Yeah. And I guess that draws us to, you're talking about the horizontals. Now we're talking about the plumb rule.
Vertical, that's a vertical.
Vertical, just right and upright.
Upright. The plumb rule is, you've all seen, these days they have laser devices and that, so we don't use plumb bobs so much, but a plumb bob is used to measure a perfect upright. And they had a tool with like a letter F, and they would run a string from the top prong of the F down with a plumb bob at the bottom, and it had to actually completely line up with the edges of the letter F, then they knew that they had a perfect upright. That's the ancient plumb rule. And this is what the plumb rule does. The plumb rule measures uprights. So symbolically, to be an upright person, of course, you're a man of integrity. You're an upright citizen. You're a model. Someone that maybe that you want to be. We all want to be somebody that other people can look up to.
Yeah.
You know, not because that you're powerful, but because you're someone that I'd like to be like. You know, you go into your lodge room and you'll see guys in your brethren in your lodge room, and you'll say, "Gee, you know, I'd like to be like him. You know, he's such a nice guy. He's so knowledgeable, and he has the time to say hello, and he sits, talks with me, and you think, well, that's what we want to aspire to.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think uprightness is important.
Uprightness is
strength
very
of
important.
character.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something we offer young guys who could, or anyone really, it doesn't have to be young or old. I mean, you join Freemasonry, that's what it's all about, building your character, to be an upright figure. And I think that actually, I don't know what your feeling is, James, but I think actually the plumb rule as a symbol gets lost in Freemasonry. Not many people talk about it. I've never heard many people talk about it.
We don't talk about it a lot. And
I think it's really important.
It's talked about in that charge, but one point I like to stress in the map too is the fact that these particular working tools, this degree, are also worn around the necks of the three most important guys in the room: the master, the senior warden, and the junior warden. The master, we'll start from the bottom. The junior warden wears a plumb rule around his neck, okay, because he represents integrity. The senior warden wears a level around his neck. That's his jewel. That's his office. That's a symbol of his office. That symbolises what he is, senior warden. Second most important person in the room. The most important person in the room is the worshipful master, and he wears a square around his neck. So once again, here you have these three working tools of this degree being worn by the three most important people in the room.
Yeah.
Now, one measures an upright, okay? The other measures a horizontal. So when you get a vertical meeting a horizontal, you have an angle of 90 degrees, and you have a square.
Yeah, yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
so there you're looking at a whole new gamut of thought here.
Exactly right.
Okay, you've got integrity and equality. But the most important thing is the fact that the junior warden sits on the south side of the room, which represents beauty. The senior warden sits in the western end of the room, which represents strength. All right, so you've got strength and beauty, feminine, masculine. You've got those two opposites. Now, the worshipful master sits in the east. He represents wisdom, and he combines strength with firmness of mind and the beauties of spatial eloquence in the governing of his life. He combines wisdom with strength and beauty. He's a combination of all these virtues.
Yeah, all coming together,
Coming together. So when you're the master, you've taken the virtues, both those two other tools, and you've combined them with the square, which represents the golden rule of doing to others, and you have all that with you.
I mean, is that that's just an aspect that sort of just come to mind now. With all that symbolism, it's obviously there. Is the second degree also trying to subtly get the candidate to learn about the governance of the lodge in preparation for leadership?
Yeah, well, that says it's about subordination and leadership. You actually, as you progress through the offices within a lodge, you're actually gaining more responsibility, and once you become a warden, you sort of have a little bit of authority. You're sitting in a very big chair, you have a gavel and a setting board you can bang, and suddenly people are saluting you.
Yeah.
And only three people in the lodge get saluted, right?
Yeah.
Master and the wardens. No one salutes the secretary, no one salutes the director, but they salute each. So suddenly you're in a position where people are actually deferring to you.
Yes.
Which sort of shows you the fact that not only the fact that you've got a little bit of power, but you must have that responsibility to use that power correctly.
Yeah. And that's all obviously harnessed through education.
It's through education and through the working tools of the first degree, which you've got with you.
Yeah.
You bring them with you, your conscience and learning and all that with you.
And in the Southeast Charge, I think we call it a progressive science, don't we?
It is, it is progressive. You're gaining more as you go.
Because last week you were saying that we placed the candidate in the northeast part of the lodge for the first degree. In this degree, we put them in the southeast part. And it's really interesting because it is, you are right. We can't think of the degrees as separate and distinct, although they are. We have to think of them as cumulative in the sense that the knowledge it continues on. The tools are being gained. Your toolbox is getting filled. You're not just using one set of tools, dropping it and using another. It's just slowly increasing.
You bring them, you put them into I always think I always carry a little box with working tools into a map.
Yeah.
Because to me, it's like a toolbox. And I keep all my working tools in there, and I bring out the toolbox tools underneath that degree. But the other ones are there too. I can reach in there and pull them out anytime I want.
Yeah,
so rather than have them in the lodge room where they sit on like a triangular configuration, we open a little door and reveal them.
Yeah.
And no one touches them.
Yeah.
I touch them, I hold them, and I might even pass them around.
Well, I think in other constitutions they do physically give you the tools.
So I have a toolbox because I think these tools you should take with you.
Well, they're the tools to life, aren't they?
Tools to life, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and I guess what we'll do now is because we've hit the nail on the head in terms of the governance side of things, and it does seem like a very important degree. And people would say, why is the second degree such a big degree? There's so much in it. I just want to ask you, just in terms of, just so our listeners know, the third degree in Freemasonry is only relevantly new recently. Yeah. You used to do 2 degrees, didn't you?
Yeah, well, according to the ancient manuscripts, they talk about 2. Third degree, from what we can gather, came about in about 1730. That's when there was a huge explosion of mindfulness at that time, where people wanted to bring about degrees, and not only in Freemasonry but also outside of Freemasonry. There were degrees. There were organisations like the Gardeners, the Foresters, Manchester Unity, Independent Order of Oddfellows, all these sort of Buffaloes, the Antediluvian Order of Buffaloes, the Elks,
the Elks.
all this sort of exploded at that particular time because of all this moral teaching. You know, Albert Pike sits down and he starts to map out the ancient accepted right. All this sort of thing happened, you know, in those times.
So the third degree spawned from that.
Well, from what I can get, it seems that like an innovation that came about, but an innovation that was added but was already there.
Yeah.
So whether actually what was in the third degree was part of the other two degrees, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm not a great historian, but I do know the fact that the teachings of the third degree centre around the central architect of the temple.
Yeah.
Now, but I do believe the fact that was actually back in the mist of time was actually altered from this particular architect who we call Hiram Abiff to Noah.
Yeah.
And we have the Noachitic legend, we have the Hiramic legend and the Noachitic legend, and somewhere it was exchanged, but the teaching stayed the same. So that tells me that even though it was introduced into Freemasonry and in a deal, I believe, between the ancients and the moderns.
Yeah. When they
When
formed
they
the
came
United Grand
together,
Lodge of England.
but this was already there and being worked somewhere, somehow, but I don't know an awful lot
But
about
before
it.
that, it was just the entered apprentice degree, and then you're the Fellow of the Craft, which is now known as the Fellow
But
Craft
I always
degree.
felt that the third degree stood alone. It was different.
It's different.
It was different. It come from a different source.
Yes. Whereas these other two degrees seem to be part of the same tradition.
But the source of it could go back to way back into early history, the teachings of the third degree, and there was so much in that.
So that's the thing, the history of Freemasonry is open to a lot of conjecture. There isn't much documentation, and it's
No, there isn't. And
speculative.
I mean, like the first Grand Lodge in the world was formed in England in 1717, but we do have reference to the fact that a man called Elias Ashmole was actually initiated in 1646.
Yeah. And that's just one document.
And that was the first documented evidence of an initiation. But there were also, in his diary, he talks about several other gentlemen, and he names them that were in the room. So obviously these gentlemen were initiated too. Here we have undocumented Freemasonry going right back. So, from us at this perspective, to understand where this come from, to me, I have not a great deal of interest in where it come from, but
what it means,
what it is now, and how we can apply it now.
You're right, 100% correct. In terms of looking at that now, this is something I know that you've been particularly interested in. You've researched quite consistently. In this degree, as in every degree, numbers are important, as you mentioned last week with geometry. In this, it's 3, 5, and 7. Talk a little bit about the numbers, and maybe also give us an idea of how your research has led you to the Fibonacci sequence, because I think that's really fascinating.
It was explained to me one day when someone gave a little talk about it, and something just clicked in my mind, the fact that here we have the hidden mystery of nature and science. We don't mention it, we don't talk about it, but when I did the map too, I felt that there's not an awful lot that you can present in a map that actually you didn't talk about previously in the map 1, because it's an extension, it's a progression. And when you have a progression, you bring a lot of the original with you. But I looked at this and I thought, this is the linchpin of this whole degree, is this hidden mystery of nature and science. And the more I studied it, the more I realised the fact that when you look at the Fibonacci sequence, those who are not familiar with it, is that you have the number, you have 0 and 1. When you add 0 and 1, you have 1. So, okay, then you have 1 and the previous number, which is 1 together, you have 2. You add 2 together with 1, you have 3. And it goes on to 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and it goes on to infinity. But when you actually put it together in blocks, you create the Fibonacci spiral. It's very hard to talk about this, but anyone should go to YouTube and type in Fibonacci spiral, and you will see what we're talking about. And that produces what we call the golden measurement, the golden mean.
Yeah.
And then this golden mean is a number of 1 to 0.618, or 0.618 of the whole, or 1.618 over the whole. So once again, you have this measurement, and when you look at this measurement, everything is measured to this point. You look at your the Parthenon, and I show this in the map, how the Parthenon, where a certain part of it is 0.618 of the whole, from the bottom to the top. Everything is in this ratio. It's very hard to explain this without actually showing it, but the human body itself is all built to this. To this. And if anyone's a Freemason in Victoria, are welcome to come to my map and see this.
Yeah, maybe we can link. Maybe we can link in the show notes some videos and
some videos. And now I went searching for this, and I found these videos on all places YouTube. So I went looking for this stuff. I went looking. I wanted to find something where I could present this. I wasn't going to stand there and talk about this in front of people with notes in my hand. I was going to let a video do it for me, so they could visually see this. And the response I've got is just, it blows me away. Some people, it's their favourite map.
Yeah.
Because of the Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah.
You know, and the golden mean, and without going into too much. And everything in nature is constructed to this formula. Trees, plants, starfish, waves, hurricanes, cyclones, galaxies.
Yeah.
And you think, wow, okay. And the bottom line of this is the fact that it all points back to a designer.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
A designer. So
Yeah.
we're all sort of designed to this sort of plan.
Yeah.
So somewhere, somehow, there was a designer. And we refer to this designer as the grand geometrician of the universe.
In this degree,
So we're now looking to a geometrician, someone that uses the several liberal arts and sciences to create. And
Exactly right. I mean, the quest is to find the hidden mysteries of nature and science. And what you're saying is that this is, in your own researches, something where you felt you've touched upon that now. You've discovered, well, not discovered, but you've been able to research and understand an element of those hidden mysteries.
This is where, if you're an atheist and you're a scientist, and you'd actually prescribe to random selection, and that wouldn't work in Freemason because that sort of doesn't. It's a different train of thought.
It is.
I don't say they're wrong.
No, it's a different tradition, though.
You know, the Big Bang, I don't say it's wrong.
Yeah.
You know, and I just, my mind's open to all this.
Exactly right, and I mean, and this is what we were talking about in our episode 2 weeks ago. We're talking about what is the requirement to join Freemasonry? How flexible is the Supreme Being requirement? And one of the things we're talking about is, even with the Big Bang and these scientific discoveries, there is nothing to suggest that it's inconsistent in the sense that you can still believe it's a creative force. There's a question of, what is the creative force?
Okay, so we had a Big Bang. Who pushed the button to start the Big
Exactly
Bang?
right.
Okay.
Exactly
so,
right.
you know, it's just... You know,
and that's interesting, you know.
You know, that's just how you look at it, how you view it, and what angle you view it from.
And that's what's great about this whole degree. And there's no right or wrong.
No.
It's all about looking at these things and trying to dissect your understanding of the world around you. I think that's a very important thing, to understand what you're doing, where you come from.
What is in nature, and, you know, and to get in the video that I show, the Grand Superintendent of Education who put the video together talks a bit about the birth of a child, and you know, the wonder of the birth of a child. And if you've ever been to the birth of your own child, you know, you look at that and it's humbling.
Yeah.
That's, you know, you're seeing a human being coming into form, and you look at, this is all nature.
Yeah.
That a woman gives birth to a child, and you think, how wonderful is this? And that's, you know, to look around you in wonder and take it in and understand it and enjoy it. And
yeah, I mean, I think that's incredible, and that's part of life. You know, these hidden mysteries, they're all around us, and we take them for granted sometimes. But moving on to another very important part of the second degree is the allegory of the winding stairs. Tell us a bit about that. I love this allegory.
I love the winding stairs is an important teaching in this degree. For those, we go back to King Solomon's temple. The middle chamber was like a side room, a side part of the building. It wasn't actually the central part, because that was a holy place. The middle chamber wasn't a holy place, where all the administrative stuff was done. That's where they paid the ancient brethren who at that time were building it. So that's, of course, if that part of the place was built. To get to there, you had to go up a set of winding stairs to get into this. So you walk into the foyer of the temple, you can sort of do a quick left turn before you go in the doors. You go to a side door, there's a winding staircase, and there's the middle chamber. Going upstairs is not an easy job. Now, I challenge anybody at their workplace, don't take the lift, go up the stairs. There's always stairs next to a lift.
I should take your advice.
And go upstairs, and by the time you get to your floor, you sort of think, oh, that took a bit of effort. You know, you get your Fitbit out and look at it and think, gee, I walked up 7 floors. Okay, so that takes effort to walk upstairs.
Yes.
Going through life takes effort.
Yeah.
It's not easy. You know, Malcolm Fraser, former Prime Minister, said life was never meant to be easy, and it's not.
But that's what's great about this analogy. I mean, the concept of going through life and not knowing, you know, what's going to... I mean, that happens to me all the time. Things go wrong, and you sit there and you think, oh, I wish I did this, and I wish I did that, and I wish I could have changed all these things. But you think about it,
Can't change them.
life is unpredictable.
That's right.
And that's a beautiful lesson. I really, really like that. I mean, when you tell people this in the maps, a light bulb must just...
Yeah, that's why we do this. That's why we walk around this winding staircase. That's why we do these funny steps on the balls of our feet as we go. You know, it's because you're stepping upstairs. You know, you're progressing.
You're not sure what's going to happen at the other side. All right, let's... the last thing I want to sort of cover, because I know there's so much we can cover in this degree, let's talk a little about the tracing board. Obviously, we can't say what's on it, but what I want to talk about is some of the things that come out of it. For example, one of the lessons you taught during that charge is about being paid in species. You know, in the first degree, you know, you're paid with oil and wine and these sorts of things because you're an entered apprentice builder.
Yeah, fellow craft get paid in specie. An apprentice gets paid in oil and corn and oil because he can trade that off for whatever he wants. This is what the traditional history tells us, and you're paid in specie as a fellow craft, and the wages you get paid really are a reflection of how much you do. And when you would in the traditional history, when the operative masons would mark the stones, would prepare the stone, they would put their mark on it so that the overseer that was examining the stone would tell who did what. And so that, you know, Jack did 10 stones a day, Steve did 5 stones a day. So I'm going to pay Jack double what I pay Steve because he did that double the work. So
Yeah.
Steve, you know, goofed off a bit perhaps, I don't know. So, you know, so that's why so what you put in is what you get paid. So, and you get paid with that, what we call scruple or diffidence.
Yeah,
And that's part of these questions and answers. And this is something that's not explained to a candidate often, what is scruple and what is diffidence. And quite often you think without scruple means unscrupulous, but that means it's quite a different thing.
Yeah.
You know, scruple tells you that the authority that's paying you is of integrity, and you don't need to challenge it.
Yeah, and you've done the work to deserve that.
You've done the work to deserve that. And without diffidence, diffidence is like shyness. So, you know, when you have diffidence and you think something's not quite right with your pay, but you're a bit scared of the boss, you know, I'd rather not cause waves.
Yeah.
That's diffidence.
Yeah.
You know, so these guys didn't have a diffidence because they knew what they were entitled to.
Yeah,
so
they were proud of their work.
That's basically what it means.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
that scruple or diffidence. You know, you know that your employer has integrity, and you know the fact that you're entitled to what you're going to get.
I mean, we'll talk about this in a moment, but there is another degree in Appendic Order in Freemasonry called the Mark Master Mason's degree, which is traditionally seen to be an extension of the second degree, and there's a big focus of getting paid the proper wages in that degree as well.
Absolutely.
One thing that came to mind, I'm not sure if you've probably thought of this before, but the idea of getting paid species or money is actually quite liberating because it's about, we're now going to pay you money which you can spend at your discretion.
That's right.
You've learnt enough and we trust you enough to be able to judge what is in your interest in terms of how you spend your money. I think that's quite important.
In the Marc Degree, they push that a little bit further. I'm going to explain what Marc Degree is before I go any further.
Yeah.
In Victorian Constitution, Freemasonry represents 5 degrees, recognises 5 degrees. Entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason, which we've talked about. And there are 2 other degrees: the degree of the Mark Master Mason and the degree of the Holy Royal Arch, or what's commonly called chapter. To be a Mark Master Mason or belong to chapter, do the degree in chapter, you have to join a different lodge to do that. All right? And we're a different regalia, and these degrees are managed separately from the craft degrees. They have their own administration, but they do conform to the basic tenets of the degree.
And you're on the Grand Mark team, aren't you?
I am on the Grand
Are you
Mark
Grand
team.
Swordbearer this year?
I'm the Grand Swordbearer.
There you go.
It's like a bodyguard.
Yeah.
Walk into the Grand Master with a sword.
You get to carry an awesome
But
sword.
it's not as important to me as doing a map.
Yes.
So that's no disrespect to the Grand team.
Yeah.
You know, so if the Mark Grand Master listen to this, no, but it's important. And where we are, we're going back to this now. When in the Marc Degree, we emphasise about going into the middle chamber and getting your wages, and this is an important teaching in that degree. And one thing that's said to you is, use it and don't abuse it, and go on your way rejoicing.
Yeah.
And you think about that little line: use it but don't abuse it. Okay, you got paid, but don't go to the pokies.
Yeah.
You know, just make sure your family's got food
Exactly
first.
right.
You know,
Do
make
what's
sure that your
responsible.
rent's paid. Make sure your bills are paid before you go on. Business for pleasure. Make sure all your important things are met. You know, before you go and do a bit of leisure time.
I mean, one thing that people would have heard recently, especially with all the different leaders this country's had over the last 5 years, one thing that's almost repeated every time is the dignity of work. The dignity of work. You hear that phrase, and I think for a lot of people it just goes over their head now. They're like, that's just another politician. But there is something to that, isn't there?
There is something to that. So, when we learn ritual, when we present ritual, when we perform in our ceremonies, it's like work. And it's the integrity of how you present yourself, how you present what you're trying to deliver to a candidate or to the brethren in the lodge, how you carry yourself. That's important because those sort of attributes you take into your daily life.
Yeah, you do. And that stuff's really important.
It is important.
One last thing I wanted to look over before we wrap up this segment is the checkered paper, because it's there in the first degree, you see it, but I think in the second degree the tracing board really emphasises it. It's sort of alluded to it at the very least. It means a lot of different things to a lot of people. For me, it's like yin and yang, dark and light. You know, the fact that in society, in the world,
it's dualities.
Dualities, yeah.
Absolutely.
Could you tell us a little bit more about your perspective on that?
You can't have one without the other. Now, as far as religious go, I'm a Buddhist, and we teach the yin yang. Yin yang is so important, and in our teaching we say you can't understand happiness until you measure it against sadness.
Yes.
So then you understand what happiness means because you measured it against its opposite.
Yes.
So the opposites in life are very important. So when you look at this square pavement, there's an equal number of black squares and white squares, which tells you the fact that as you go through life, you're going to have happy events, you're going to have sad events, you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. You're going to have good health, you're going to have bad health. Unfortunately, some people, those squares don't equate too well.
Yes.
They have a more hard luck than other people do,
yes.
and that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But this just tells you the fact that it's not all going to go your way.
Yes,
you know,
and
there are
to
going to
expect
be
opposites.
There are going to be the opposites, you know, and you've got to expect that. You know, people say, "Oh, it's cold." Well, of course it's cold. It's winter.
Yes.
But in 6 months' time, it'll be hot.
You won't know cold unless you've experienced hot.
Hot. You don't know.
Yeah.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is to me what the symbolism of the checkerboard pavement means, that the fact that life has dualities and we have to understand and accept that.
Yeah, I mean, even taking it one step further, mixing the white and the black together gives you grey.
Yes.
This concept that in life there is
Yeah.
also grey.
Yeah, that's one thing that I find that counters that argument, is the fact that when you deal in absolutes, you're never going to be right.
Yes.
You know, you have to sometimes step out of the absolutes to understand the grey area. You know, in my job in airport security, you know, people present with an item that really isn't listed as a prohibited item, but really we look at it and think, well, that really shouldn't go anyway, because it really... It has the potential to be used, but it's just on the list. Yeah. So once again, now you're stepping into a grey area. Yeah. So you have to make a call. You have to call the shot there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, does this item go on an aircraft or doesn't it?
Yeah.
So you know, obviously, you when you're sitting and looking at checkerboard payments, you are looking at absolutes, and you remind yourself that maybe, you know, life it's not made of absolutes. You know, it's not all going to be, you know, either this or that.
Yeah.
You know, and
if only.
People that deal in that way find it very hard when something in the grey area turns up.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't read here, it doesn't read there. Okay, so yeah.
I mean, that transposes to my...
It's amazing. It's
my practice. I mean, I work... I'm a law student, and when you first start learning law, you're taught black and white.
Yep.
This and that. But part of what makes a good law student later down the track is the ability to notice the grey. And to be able to identify the grey. Because in life, like you said, you know, the absolutes maybe draw those lines where we know one side to another, but most of the time we're dealing either from... It's like a pendulum. We swing. And sometimes you're stuck in the middle, and sometimes you really can't go either way.
It's like the political spectrum. You have the left and the right. You know, one hand you got the fascists, the other hand you got the communists.
Yeah.
You know, the world isn't made up like that. No. I'm sorry, but it's not.
It isn't.
You know, there are a lot of people that walk the middle path.
Yeah.
You know,
who are to accept values from...
Yeah, and I think that walking the middle path is important when you look at the checkerboard pavement. That yes, there are absolutes, yes, there are dualities, there are opposites, but sometimes we have to negotiate these opposites.
Beautiful. Well, James, look, on behalf of the Brought to Light Masonic podcast, I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to come in today.
Thank you so much for having me for the last 2 weeks. It's really been a thrill on both days to be here, and I just wish that something like the Blue Lounge, and this was around when I was first a Freemason, it would have made my journey a lot easier from the beginning. But what I want to say is, you know, even though we have a lot less Freemasons than what we did when I joined, I think this is the most exciting time to be a Freemason.
Couldn't agree more.
And Freemason excites me more now than what it ever did.
And I hope that what we've done today will bring some light to other people out there.
I hope so. And anyone in Melbourne's welcome to come to my MAP program. They've only got to go to the United Grand Lodge of Victoria's webpage, Freemasons Victoria. Just go type in Freemasons Victoria, and you will find it there.
Yeah, and if you have any questions for James, please send an email to podcast@blue.fmvic.com and we'll forward them on to James. I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer those questions.
Most likely, and come up and say hello to me if you come to a map. And,
Yeah.
Pleased to see you.
James, on behalf of us all here at the Brought to Light podcast, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And that was an interview for Brother James Tolkien. Thank you to Worship Brother James Tolkien for giving us the time of coming out. It's 2 weeks in a row that he spent time with us to give you guys, the listeners, and us a real opportunity to talk about these degrees in a way that looks at the principles and the symbols and some of the stuff that comes out of them without actually ruining the surprise. And as you said, Steve, before we started the interview, he's so passionate. I hope you enjoyed it.
Oh, of course. I mean, I hear him every month. I've had the privilege of actually delivering the first and second degree maps myself the last preceding 2 months to this interview today, and it's taken me 4 years to get up there and do that. But Jim's been doing it for so long, and he needs the support. And we all have days where we can't get up and do stuff. So in that case, he's now got me as a backup. And some guys have got 4 or 5 guys in other districts that back him up in that position. But as you can hear in his interview, he loves it. And as I said, he's revolutionised the maps in my opinion. And
Yeah.
I mean, I do get a bit vocal and pigeonholed about it because I just love what he does.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, he's taken a program that was quite controversial when it was introduced.
Yeah, it was.
This compulsory education, which I support completely.
Oh, definitely. There's other states looking at it too now.
As they should. I mean, he's taken this program and he's made it fun and enjoyable.
Yeah, which is what Lodge should be.
That's what it should be about, because this is something we're trying to do at the Blue Lounge as well. We're trying to make an environment that is informal. When you go to these maps, you've got to remember you're not dressing up. It's informal. It's relaxed. You're just seeing it.
Yeah.
It's a really good presentation. It's interactive, and the fact that you're following in his footsteps and assisting him and now doing the presentations is remarkable because it shows that this is going to be something that continues. So.
Oh yeah, it's and as Jim mentioned, it's all about education and expanding your circle, isn't it?
Yeah,
really?
It is. Yeah.
And this is an integral part of linking the 3 degrees together.
Yeah.
And learning what you've been through, and we do that through the map to an extent. But visiting, as you've mentioned last week with James, he's learnt so much. I mean, I think he's nearly overtaken me. I visited 9 first degrees in my first 3 months. And it was a bit too much. But,
I think he's done that in a month.
Yeah.
And I can't stop him.
No.
So.
Look, you just got to let people find their own path.
Yeah.
And
I mean, let's talk about that. I mean, this is one aspect I didn't touch with James in our interview. When you become a fellow craft, you're expected to become what's called a journeyman.
Yes.
So you're allowed to visit. When you visit as an entered apprentice, you're expected to go for mentor. So it's a master mason of your lodge. Because when you go to a lodge and they don't know you, although it's rare because you usually visit within your own district, so you know a lot of people. But if, say, I go to a lodge in another district and they don't know who I am, they have to prove me. They have to test me, make sure I know the signs and the passwords and whatever else, just to make sure I'm a Freemason. Because anyone can buy an apron, right? So when you become a journeyman, a fellow craft, you're then expected or encouraged to visit lodges.
Well, that's exactly right. And you don't have an apron as such at this point of your own. You purchase that when you become a Master Mason.
Yeah.
As I say, some things, the only thing in Freemasonry is the first 4 letters, really. But that's just a running joke around the world. But so each lodge will have a stash of entered apprentice and fellow craft aprons. So you rock up, they run you through a test, which I did. I visited, even though I was with my father, the Tyler, who's the guy who's in charge of letting you in, took me to another room, made sure I knew the correct sign and password.
Yeah.
And proved me. You got to be vouched for to go into that lodge.
Exactly right. I mean, when you became a fellow craft, your dad was obviously your mentor at that point.
Yes, he was.
And he encouraged you to go and visit as much as possible?
Yes, and I did. I started picking up older brethren that couldn't drive themselves and taking them. So
as a fellow craft.
And lodges love it. They very rarely, they get a lot of past masters and current masters on the road, as we call it, which is mean they're visiting, but they very rarely get Master Masons or lower ranks, and they get very excited.
Well, that's one thing we've changed with the Blue Lounge, isn't it?
Yeah.
When we visit, it's the most senior officer you'll get is a Master Mason, and it'll usually be followed by 4 or 5 fellow crafts.
We've got a couple of WMs in there, guys.
We've got 2 now.
Yeah.
2.
We're getting there.
Which is good, but I think that you got to understand, our listeners need to understand that, Steve, you're one of the best visitors because you're always out. You're always. It's not because you've got nothing better to do. Maybe it is, but it's because you actually enjoy going along and supporting these other.
Yeah,
lodges.
I do. Look, you get to. I think you relax more when you visit too.
Yeah.
I mean, you've always. I mean, I've always got my hand in a job, helping out, running the food out, or making sure the drinks are on the table, or just getting around and meeting guys, and that's part of hosting visitors at your own lodge. So when you go, you get that reciprocated, and you get to sit down, and have a chat, and meet people. I try and move around and sit with someone different each time I visit. I might visit a lodge 2 or 3 times in a year, but seeing those guys, and of course I'm in the map, and I've been there for 5 or 6 years now, helping Jim out, or James Tulk out. That I've seen these guys, first, second, third degree, come and see me because they've got to do their map.
Yeah.
And you get out to their lodges and see them, and they go, "Oh, I remember you. You haven't seen them for 2 years," but that's the whole point. I'm walking through the city the other day. This guy stopped me. I didn't recognise him, but he was a Freemason that I'd met 18 months ago.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of the second degree.
Yeah.
You're told to discover the hidden mysteries of nature and science, and James and I talked about what that could mean in terms of the detailed, maybe the more esoteric elements of God and nature and the universe.
Correct.
But even from a more practical perspective, the hidden mysteries of nature and science is simply knowing your neighbour, knowing people.
Yes.
So visiting is you're doing that when you're visiting. That's a practical thing.
Not just visiting lodges, getting around, having a go. And I know a brother that he's a member of a Marc Degree down in Waverley, but there's a widow of a member of his craft lodge that lives next door to this temple. So he finished a bit early and he gave her a quick call and said, "Put the kettle on," and went and had a cup of tea with her. So that's the same sort of deal.
Right. And that's the beautiful thing about visiting, and the fellow craft degree is all about that.
Yeah,
that's the expectation that's set. And I think before we wrap up, I just want to quickly talk about the Marc Degree. We're going to dedicate a whole episode to this. We might get someone in who's more of an expert, but just so you know, Steve and I are both members of the Marc Master Masons degree. I'm a member of the Victory United Brunswick Marc Master Masons Lodge.
I'm at Greensboro.
And you're at Greensboro. And Steve, you're also on the Futures Committee.
Yes.
Of the Marc.
Strategy Committee, yeah.
And just so everyone knows, the Futures Committee or the Strategy Committee, one's been set up for the chapter, which I'm a member of, and one's been set up for the Marc, which Steve's a member of. And it's a very important committee. It's not just any other committee. It's a committee that is about setting the direction for these other orders, because their membership has dropped like the rest of Freemasonry.
Yes.
And looking at ways we can make these other degrees more attractive, because the fifth, and these degrees are the 5 degrees of Freemasonry. Yes. What have you enjoyed about the Marc, and why should someone who's completing their second degree start thinking about maybe joining when they finish their their Master Masons degree? Why would this complement the second degree in your view?
It extends on the story of the fellow craft.
Yep.
So it goes more into... they call it the friendly degree. They jokingly say that, and they are a lot more relaxed, and they have a bit more banter and fun. And that aside, it's an extension of your education, and builds on that.
The whole lesson.
The whole lesson
is about do work, but do it well.
Yes.
Right, and what a better extension to the second degree than that could be. So, obviously, we'll dedicate a whole lesson to this, but I thought I want to encourage our listeners to check out the Marc Master Masons degree.
Definitely. I mean, make sure that it's also clear that you cannot join it until you've 6 months after you've been a Master Mason, which used to be 12 months, but they've reduced that, and that's one of the keys of trying to encourage guys. You'll always get a brother that's trying to push you in, but don't be pushed into it.
Yep.
But it is a very... I mean, I had no intentions of joining it until I'd become a master of my craft lodge, but I was just sitting with these brethren I catch up with every month out of the lodge. The 2 Wallies, one's 96, one's 80. Wally Junior, Wally Senior, Wally 1, Wally 2. And just they sparked my interest. I think maybe they just encouraged me without me even knowing. And it was my father's Marc Lodge, and I joined, and I just really enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's something that's worth mentioning. And obviously anything we say is just our opinions, but you'll get brethren who tell you never to join these other orders, and you're just going to burn yourself out and you're wasting your time. And then we get other brethren who say you must join these other orders, and you get, in a situation where... Remember, Freemasonry is a journey that you take. You do what's right for you.
Exactly.
All we're doing on this podcast is letting you know about the option. I've got a lot out of the Marc. I think the Marc is complementary. And
yes.
it completed my journey. and that in the chapter. But the mark especially, since we're talking about the second degree, is great.
Yes.
So I think you can check, if you go on Google and type in the Marc Degree or Grand Mark Victoria,
Yep.
there's a website you can jump on and check it out. Even if you are in your fellow craft, start thinking about what you want to do.
And if Wayne L. Smith, you're listening, we're coming for you.
Yes, Wayne L. Smith is the Grand Secretary of the Mark, and sure, you can shoot him any questions, or if you have any questions for us, send out an email to contact@blue.fmvic.com. All right, well, Steve, thank you very much for coming on today's episode.
Oh, thanks, Jack. I really enjoyed it.
I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah.
I'll be back again.
Please come back. And just to our listeners, thank you very much for listening. We are really excited to have been able to deliver this podcast. And next week, we will be having an episode on the third degree to finish off this round of talking about the craft degrees. We'll be having a special guest, Worshipful Brother Brendan Kine of the Victorian Lodge of Research, who'll be talking about the esoteric elements of the third degree.
Very interesting man and very knowledgeable in the history. You'll really enjoy that, folks. And, well, as we say in this Marc Degree, happy to meet.
Sorry to part.
Happy to meet again.
And what a fantastic set of conversations that was. Not only with Worshipful Brother James Tolk, who is a District Education Officer here in the Northern District in Victoria, but also with my co-host, Brother Steve Austin, who was very generous with his time. We hope that you had a very good time listening to this episode and that you enjoyed our talks about not only the second degree but last week's episode of the first degree. We're going to end this episode with a reading by Brother Lucas Crandalls, who'll be reading the Sons of Light booklet, which is given to every Master Mason here in the Victorian jurisdiction, and it's such a great resource. It was written by Right Worshipful Brother Kenneth G. Linton, past Grand Senior Warden, and he is of the past Master of the Lodge of Research, number 218, on the register of the Victorian Grand Lodge, and his chapter will be an eloquent discussion about the second degree, which I hope you enjoy. Until next time, thank you very much for listening to the Brought to Light Masonic podcast. I'm your host, Brother Jack Aquilina.
A journey through the second degree. It seems a misnomer to call this chapter a journey through the second degree, as the second degree is itself a journey. In fact, it is the Masonic journey. The first represents sunrise, birth, beginning. The third represents sunset, death, the end. But the second represents the time between sunrise and sunset, between birth and death, the distance between the beginning and the end. However, it is intended to conduct the reader through the second degree, following the order of the ceremony, touching on its highlights, and adding some interpretation and explanation, as we did in the first degree. As we make this journey, let us keep in mind the main aim and purpose of the second degree, which is to inculcate the importance of developing the intellectual faculty so that its attainments may lift us to a truer and fuller appreciation of the wonderful works of the Almighty Creator. In the second degree, the lodge is opened on the square, that great Masonic emblem of the Golden Rule, of doing unto others as in similar cases we would wish that they should do to us, or, as we Freemasons put it, of acting on the square. This is the way of life that Freemasonry teaches, and has ever taught, that is, to so harmonise our conduct in this life as to render us acceptable to that divine being from whom all goodness springs. It is thus fitting that the candidate for the second degree should gain admission by the assistance of the square. In the first degree, the brethren are asked to take notice that the candidate is about to pass in view before them, but in this degree the word now is added, is now about to pass in view before them, reminding us that now is the time to remember our Creator, and that now is the time to perform our allotted task while it is yet day. In the second degree, the sun is always at its meridian. The predominating number of this degree is 5, and so the candidate advances to the east by 5 steps, as though ascending a winding staircase. The winding staircase, to my mind, is the greatest symbol in the second degree. However, we will deal with that when we come to the tracing board, and then you can judge for yourself. As the candidate kneels for the obligation, the number 5 again predominates, for in doing so he forms 5 squares. In numerology, 5 is the number of social relations, thus identifying it with the Masonic square and the 5 points of fellowship, but that, of course, belongs to the third degree. In the secrets we are told, "For it was in this position that Moses prayed fervently to the Almighty." This alludes to the time when an army of Israelites, under the command of Joshua, were engaged in battle with the Amalekites. Now, even though they were greatly outnumbered, the Almighty had assured Moses that the Israelites would prevail as long as Moses held his hand in this position as a sign of prayer and a token of the faith of Israel, that numbers were of no importance when the Almighty was on their side. This incident is recorded in the book of Exodus 17:11-12, where we read, "And it came to pass, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands were heavy, and they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat thereon. And Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands, the one on the one side, and the other on the other side, and his hands were steady till the going down of the sun." The word of the degree is a Hebrew word, and when conjoined with that in the former degree, forms the key to God's covenant with Israel, as we will readily see when we repeat the covenant, "In the strength of Jehovah shall the king rejoice, for he will establish the throne of David and his kingdom to his seed forever." This is the real importance of the word. The fact that the assistant high priest bore the same name as the southern pillar is incidental, but it did provide our ancient brethren with a ready means of remembering the name of the pillar. There is no account of the dedication of the temple in the Bible, but that event is amply recorded by the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus in his work Jewish Antiquities. In his account we find that Zadok has become the sole high priest of Israel, whereas in the reign of King David he shared that office with Abiathar. Abiathar, however, was later found guilty of treason by King Solomon for aiding and abetting Adonijah in his abortive attempt to seize the throne. The king could not, of course, put to death anyone who had borne the Ark of the Covenant, but Solomon did banish Abiathar, and that is the last mention of him in the sacred volume. Josephus states quite clearly that Zadok, as the high priest of Israel, officiated at the dedication of the temple, but he makes no mention of an assistant high priest. If he had one, and he probably did, that assistant's name could have been the same as the southern pillar, because King David appointed a man by that name as one of his 24 section leaders, or concourses, as they are called in the sacred volume, when he reorganized the priesthood, and it would be from their ranks that we could expect such a promotion to come. It could well be that one of our Masonic legends has preserved a name that history has recorded nowhere else. Our ritual does not refer to the name of Zadok, the high priest, but only to that of his assistant, who assisted him at the dedication, and only because his name was the same as the southern pillar. In the southeast charge we are told, "You are now placed in the southeast part of the lodge, to mark the progress you have made." This is the 5th time that the word progress is heard in this degree. The first time was when it was used by the Tyler, when he reports, "Who has been regularly initiated into Freemasonry and has made such progress." The second time is when those words are repeated by the inner guard in his report to the master. The third time, it comes from the master himself when he announces, "Your progress in Freemasonry is marked." And the fourth time, it is spoken by the senior warden when he says, "I invest you with the distinguishing badge of a fellow craft Freemason to mark the progress." Thus we hear the word progress 5 times in the second degree. 5 is the predominating number of the degree, and progress, of course, is the central theme of this degree. Progress from sunrise to sunset, from birth to death, from beginning to end. The working tools of an entered apprentice Freemason are those used to prepare the stone for the hands of the more expert workman. But the working tools of the second degree, the square, the level, and the plumb rule, are the tools of the expert craftsman, the skilled mason responsible for the correct interpretation of the architect's designs and for their faithful execution in the building. His, therefore, are the most important of all the tools, and the charge in which they are presented to the candidate is probably the most inspiring in all our Masonic ritual. The candidate who really absorbs its philosophy can hardly fail to become a worthy Freemason. Let me now present to you those tools in the reverse order. The plumb rule, giving us the true vertical line, is the emblem of integrity, which embraces the attributes of kindness, moderation, justice, and truth, the essential qualities of the just, upright, and steadfast man, of whom the Roman poet Horace wrote over 2,000 years ago, "The man of firm and righteous will, no rabble clamorous for the wrong, nor tyrant's brow, whose frown may kill, can shake the power that makes him strong." The level, giving us the true horizontal line, is the emblem of equality, and teaches us that all men are equal, inasmuch as they are all subject to the same infirmities, all hastening to the same goal, and all to be judged by the same immutable law, regardless of race, colour, creed, or tongue. In this sense, the level is the perfect emblem of brotherhood. Thus, the Plumb Rule gives us the true vertical line, and the level gives us the true horizontal line. And when the true vertical and the true horizontal meet, they form an angle of 90 degrees, or the fourth part of a circle, which of course is the square. Now we see that the level and Plumb Rule are complementary to the square, and understand the reason that these tools are worn by the three principal officers, the master and his two wardens. And that brings us to the square, but we have already mentioned it when we dealt with the opening of the lodge. However, there are two comments that could be added at this juncture. First, in the earliest known Masonic catechism, there is this question: how many make a lodge? And the answer is given as God and the square and 5 or 7 right or perfect masons. This sounds like a riddle, but it is easily explained. God and the square. Knowing the meaning of the square, we are immediately reminded of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. To love God and our neighbour is to keep all the commandments, which of course is what Christ meant when he said, "On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets." And now for the rest of the answer, with 5 or 7 right or perfect masons. 5 is right and 7 is perfect, because 5 hold a lodge. And so 5 is the right number to form a Masonic quorum. And 7 is perfect because, as the first tracing board tells us, that is the number of regularly made masons, without which number no lodge is perfect. The second comment is that in the year 1830, when a very ancient bridge was being rebuilt near Limerick in Ireland, the architect found under the foundation stone an old corroded brass square with this inscription: "I will strive to live with love and care upon the level and upon the square." In the final charge of this degree, we are told that, as a craftsman, in our private assemblies, you may offer your sentiments and opinions on such subjects as are regularly introduced in the lecture. To what lecture does this refer? And when may we expect to receive this privilege? This is a question we are all entitled to ask, and there is, of course, an explanation. Our ritual, adopted in 1889, at the time of the union of the 4 constitutions then operating in this state, is basically the English emulation ritual, but with modifications borrowed from the Scottish, Irish and Victorian rituals then in use. This was done with the object of appeasing the brethren belonging to the other constitutions, but the added enrichment gained from the inclusion of the gems selected from these other rituals has given us what is generally considered to be the finest Masonic ritual in the world. The lectures mentioned are the catechetical lectures, which, although part of the emulation ritual, were not incorporated in our present ritual, an omission which is to be regretted, as they are not only an essential part of Freemasonry, but also because we are thereby denied a valuable privilege. Our Grand Lodge, however, has copies of these catechetical lectures and encourages their use. The third, last, and grand reason mentioned in the first tracing board is found in these same lectures, and has recently been included in our ritual. We will deal with just one thing in the tracing board, which has been purposely left to the end, and that is the winding staircase, which, as I have already claimed, is the greatest symbol in the Fellowcraft degree. Its 7 steps, the 7 liberal arts and sciences, grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, symbolise the ultimate attainment of a Fellowcraft Freemason, starting from the very beginning of man's intellectual progress. Our first intellectual advance is made possible by the development of language, thus enabling us to communicate with our neighbour and so widen the field of our knowledge, which would otherwise be restricted to our own personal experience. Grammar is the foundation of language, and so it must be the first step on the intellectual ladder. It is not enough, however, to master the structure of language. We must be able to put it into practice, and the art which teaches us to speak copiously and fluently on a subject is rhetoric, and so we move to the second step. Even the most grammatically correct and skillfully delivered language is just an empty, senseless flow of words, unless it contains logic, and so we continue to rise to the third step. Having climbed these 3 steps, we are then equipped to exchange knowledge with our neighbour. The Fellowcraft were paid their wages in specie, that is, coin or money, which here is a symbol for knowledge, because knowledge, like money, increases with usage and exchange. This exchange of knowledge enables us to compare what we know with what our neighbour knows. The science of comparison is arithmetic. Its ciphers and measurements are but the means that it uses, and so arithmetic, the 4th step, symbolises the beginning of knowledge. Our acquisition of knowledge brings us to step number 5, the predominating number of this degree, And there we find geometry, which is established as the basis of our art. Geometry, the science of harmony in space, presides over everything. We find it in the arrangement of a fir cone, in the spiral of a snail shell, in the chaplet of a spider's web, and in the orbit of a planet. It is everywhere, as perfect in the world of atoms as in the world of immensities. The snowflake is a perfect example of the geometry of God. Circles, triangles, pentagons, hexagons, and parallelograms, more exact and delicate than the deftest hand could trace. And this universal geometry tells us of a universal geometrician, whose divine compasses have measured all things. And so we realize that the development of the intellectual faculty is assuredly leading us even to the throne of God. Then geometry leads us to the next step, because music is the geometry of sound. Every note in the musical scale is exactly double the wavelength of the corresponding note in the preceding octave, and each note in a chord is in logarithmic progression. Music moves with measured step and cannot free itself from geometry without dying away in discord. Music is the concord of sweet sounds, and concord is all the law of God. Geometry brought us close to God, but music brings us closer still. Quoting Byron, "There is music in the sighing of the breeze. There is music in the gushing of a stream. There is music in all things, if men have ears. This earth is but an echo of the spheres." 7 is the number of completion, and on the 7th and uppermost step we find astronomy, by which we are taught to read the wisdom, power, and goodness of the grand geometrician of the universe in the wonder of the heavens. With the aid of astronomy, we may observe the motions of the heavenly bodies. We may measure their distances and calculate their periods and eclipses, but our finite minds may not even hope to comprehend the magnitude of God's handiwork. In the words of the poet Dryden, "How can the less the greater comprehend, or finite reason reach infinity?" Reach infinity! We cannot even contemplate it. We can, however, extend our researches into the hidden mysteries of nature and science, so let us do just that, and merely contemplate the magnitude of God's handiwork, and see how far our finite mind can extend. For example, to travel the enormous distance of 1,000,000 kilometres would be to completely circle the Earth 25 times. And if we could maintain a constant speed of 114 kilometres per hour, it would take us the whole year to complete the journey. And yet the speed of light is so great that it can traverse 1,000,000 kilometres in a fraction over 3 seconds. If we could travel at this impossible speed for just 8 minutes, we would reach the Sun, a distance of 154 million kilometres. But to reach the outer edge of our own home galaxy, the Milky Way, we would need to maintain this fantastic speed for 80,000 years. It is quite impossible, of course, for us to comprehend the extent of 80,000 years, having no experience with which to make a comparison. Suffice it to say that just 1/10 of that period would take us back to the year 6017 BC, before the Nile Valley was settled by the people who would later build the pyramids, the oldest construction in the world. Then, when we consider that this galaxy, whose magnitude is so far beyond our own comprehension, is just a tiny speck in the known universe, our finite mind is completely overwhelmed. And beyond the known universe stretches the vaster unknown, of which we are but dimly aware through our most powerful modern telescopes receiving light that started on its journey before this planet was born. All this vaster than vast universe, with its incalculable billions of stars, each many millions of times the size of this Earth, moves and revolves in obedience to a great unseen power with a precision that is perfect. No, we can never hope to comprehend. But it is here on the 7th step of the winding staircase that we may really contemplate the wonderful works of the Almighty Creator. As fellow craft Freemasons, we are expected to make the liberal arts and sciences our constant study, that we may be better enabled to discharge our duty as Freemasons and estimate the wonderful works of the Almighty Creator. When we reach the uppermost step of the winding staircase, astronomy conducts us through the paths of heavenly science till we stand at the very foot of the throne of God, of which we are as yet granted but the merest glimpse. The winding staircase leads us up by steps of 4 plus 3. 4 is of earth and 3 is divine, a perfect unity. First step is grammar, and beyond, there follow orderly. 6 other steps until on high we find astronomy. And as we climb step after step, one thing is plain to see. It is the greatest symbol in the fellow craft degree. We tread its steps one by one, ever onward, ever upward, without moving away from the centre, that point from which we cannot err, with our horizons ever widening, but the way ahead always out of sight. Then we reach the door of the middle chamber, which we find open. It is open only because the experience of the climb has trained our mind to see God in His universe, and so we enter and find the letter G. Brethren, it is only by climbing these stairs, it is only by developing the intellectual faculty that we may reach the summit and find the letter G in the middle chamber. That is, to find God in our own heart and be filled with a consciousness of His infinite wisdom, of His incomprehensible power, His boundless love and mercy, and the awesome eternity of the time and space of His universe. When we can do this, we have completed our journey through the second degree. It is then, and only then, that we can claim to be fellow craft Freemasons. You've been listening to the Brought to Light Masonic podcast, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular. We look forward to speaking to you on our next edition, and until then, we are happy to meet, sorry to part, and happy to meet again.